Good morning, everyone. We are excited about being part of the virtual conference today. And just as we get started, I'm gonna fire up the PowerPoint. Give me 1 minute. Okay, today we're here to talk about adding the why to how in your training. First of all, we want to thank again Fiesta Tents for sponsoring this education session and all its sponsors. Adding the why and the how, adding the why to the how in our training should be included in every aspect of our business, but particularly with our installers. On-the-job training is usually at a fast-paced and a need-to-know basis. For most people, it's better to understand why you do something rather than just how to do it. Taking the time to explain why will help develop a better team member and increase their overall development. Knowing why allows us, and more importantly, our staff, to make decisions in absence of direction, provide alternatives, make adjustments if the original instructions prove insufficient or incorrect. Knowing the why also sets the priority, establishes the value of the task and project, determines timing, influences what and how decisions, affects with resources to use. On-the-site training. Most installers receive on-the-job training. Often it is fast-paced and on a need-to-know basis. That need-to-know basis is usually determined by the supervisor or peers on the site. While training new team members, trainers should take the time to not only show the new team member how, but also they should show them why. Always take the time to answer questions. Understanding the why will help with their overall development. In the next few slides, we'll look at some of the hows and whys that a supervisor/trainer might encounter on a job site. We realize that there are different methods of doing things across the tent rental division. These are just a few to get you thinking about your training process. This is where if we go into one of these slides and you want to add to or have a question, you can wave or do the chat room. Tensioning structure cables. There's a lot of effort. A lot of times we go into put up a structure and we'll say, go tighten that cable without really telling them why. Some of the key points of why you would tighten a structure cable, regardless if it's a 6 meter or a 30-foot gable end tent, using a ladder to tighten a cable. Some people put them at the top of the leg. Some people put them at the bottom of the leg. We are a company that puts them at the top of the leg so we can tighten the roof and the wall cables at the same time. How tight? Cables or struts are the strength of the structure. A lot of times we fail to make that known to new employees, and I will use this time to tell a story that I hope not happen to any one of you all. We had guys with us a couple of months, and they put up some tents, and we sent them out to take down a 30-foot Navitrac light. First thing they did was pull the tops. Then second thing they did was pull the cables. And as you guessed, the tent fell. Fortunately, no one was hurt. They did not know the importance of the cables. Probably a shortcoming on our fault, but just making sure that that's one of the things you think about. Squaring or leveling the first bay can make installation smoother and allow fabric to pull through easier. Again, making sure that first structure bay is square and perpendicular to the ground will help you through the rest of the install. It'll make all the other arches stand up easier. It'll also give you a much easier time pulling the tops if it's square. When to remove cables and struts, I guess I already covered that. the structure can collapse, and I'm sure we've all had some instances where that happens. Then you get into why we put in the brace bars in the first bay, etc. Raising and lowering the structure arch is another thing that generally is done by your supervisor or your lead man. Regardless of the size of the structure, raising and lowering the arches is a task that takes time and should be done with great care and safety. You need to tell them where to stand and not to stand. And of course, the why to do that is if something gets loose and falls, they know where to go. As you're raising the arches, even if you're doing it by hand or using a forklift, If you put the frame in a bind, you can damage the frame or damage a component of it. You could also actually pull it in such a bind that it snaps and could hurt someone. Checking your harnesses and straps and purling forks as you're raising this, taking the time to do that will make sure you don't have any problems raising it. You don't want a strap breaking. You don't want a fork breaking in there. Again, as you put the fork in a new guy's hand, you want to tell him what to look at, and this is why you want to look at it. Make sure all pins are secure and nuts and bolts are tight. Again, you don't want that falling from overhead. It's much easier to secure those and check those on the ground as opposed to in the air. I work better from standing on my feet than on a ladder that's 12 feet tall. Lacing tent tops. This would cover pole tents to frame tents to anything that might be in expandable form. Don't skip a lace. A lot of times we tell them how to lace a tent. Hey, lace it fast. And did you take the time to tell them what would happen if you don't do it right? You know, you might have to put the tent up, and once you get it in the air and you realize the lace is missed, you might not be able to fix it in the air and you have to take the whole thing down. Now everybody's mad at the new guy. Again, if you're putting up a tent that requires eave snaps or quarter pole snaps, that's another thing that's missed, is that snap to complete the ring of the rope around the entire tent, whether it's at the quarter pole line or at the eave line. If they miss that, you might not be able to do it while it's in there. You might have to take it back down and tighten it up. So again, as you're telling them how important it is, you can tell them what might happen if they don't. That's a good why. Do not walk on the top while on the ground. Tops can get dirty. You may step on something that could pierce the top. I see all too many, hey, you got to yell at the guy for not walking on the tent. If you took the time to tell him not to walk on the tent, here's what could happen. Maybe he'll remember why. As you're lacing the tent, if you take the time to pull the slack out, a lot of times guys will just reach up there and they'll try to do the laces, when in fact, if they just took the time to pull it out, it would really make things go quicker and smoother. Squaring pole tents. I grew up in the age of doing pole tents and not squaring them. It wasn't important. I know there's some people who have always squared, but a properly squared tent is less likely to hold water. Allow side poles to line up with the stakes. You know, if you don't pull the slack properly and you set the stakes by the layout of the tent, you're going to have a wonky looking tent. You do want the stakes and the side poles to line up and the center poles. It looks a lot more professional. It's real easy to try to cut that step and you have what might not be a safe tent and definitely doesn't look as good if you don't take that step to do that. But again, describing why to do that, this is why we do it, is very, very important. Jumper lines, of course, jumper lines are only going to be on a pole tent. Jumper lines are designed to hold the pole to the fabric should the tent be lifted in a windstorm. If they are installed improperly, it could damage the tent or could cause the tent to collapse. They should be tied properly and tight. The knot should be in line with the attachment point of the jumper line. The ropes are usually attached to the tent between the side pole and the eave rope of the tent, normally. And you want that knot to come down straight and be tied tight. If you bring it and wrap it around the pole before you tie it, you put slack in it, and as soon as the wind picks that up, the pole can turn and the rope is now loose. And now as it jumps, it just further loosens itself. Some companies even tape the jumper lines on long-term installs so they get the jumper line tight, put a little bit of strapping tape around it, and they never have to worry about that going away. Proper staking. The IFAI staking guideline is an excellent training tool. There are many good teaching points. Why to drive the stake to its full depth? You get new guys out there and you just say, drive that stake about how high. You tell them how, and you don't really tell them why. Why is it significant? Well, it holds so much more at a certain depth. You also have a trip hazard if you don't drive it to its fullest depth. Why not to put stakes at an angle? Well, that gives them a little bit of leverage. Proper distances for double or gang staking. As over the years, I know I've learned, and many of us have learned that, you speak to an engineer, if you have a stake too close to the first stake, you're actually reducing the holding power of the first stake. So revert to the guidelines from the staking study and help them to be able to make those decisions when they get out there and have to do that double staking. Somebody brought up a point to me recently: use care in removing stakes in asphalt. I've seen all too many times where you get into an asphalt parking lot, and particularly if it's old, you pull a stake, and as you pull it, the stake might be bent a little bit, or for whatever reason, it pulls up a chunk of asphalt around it. Now you have a bigger mess to clean up. Some people have said they pre-drill their holes in asphalt and then put the stake in, which gives it a cleaner hole when it's removed. So again, that's a point to tell them this is how you do it, this is why you do it. Nuts, bolts, and pins. Again, in almost all the different kinds of tents that we would install, it's important to make sure all nuts and bolts and pins are installed to the manufacturer's specifications. All too often, bolts are only hand tightened. I see that all the time. They're in a hurry. They just put it on there thinking it won't come off. Well, Mother Nature and the wind will vibrate that thing off, and it could hit somebody in the head. The bolt can fall out, and then you have a problem. If your tent requires nuts and bolts to be removed and replaced during the dismantle process, raising and lowering frame tent legs, make sure they put them back in and tightened. If the bolts are not properly tightened, they could fall out during transportation. I know we've all seen that. We use Fiesta frame tents. When we put the nut and bolt in there, a lot of times the guys, first off, they might just lay them on the ground. Second, if they don't put it on there tight, it falls off, particularly on the truck. The truck bounces, vibrates, it falls off, and now you're missing a bolt. Look at the replacement cost on nuts and bolts and pins at the end of the year, and it'll start making sense. And you might share with them, this is what we spend on these objects because you all don't take the time to do that. Drop cloths or ground cover, whatever you call it. Why do we do it? To them, it looks like another thing I don't want to do. Helps keep the tent fabric clean. It acts as a layer of protection when you need to turn a large rolled up piece of fabric. Meaning, when you get that fabric on there and you've got a 60-foot middle and it weighs 300, 400 pounds and it's not turned the right way, if they turn that on grass or asphalt or gravel, they're just ruining that tent top. Obviously, it helps prolong the fabric, cuts down on overtime hours in the washing department. I think all too many people feel like the washroom needs a job. Not true. They got enough work without having to take care of us not doing our jobs installing tents. Tensioning fabric. Frame tents, straps, or if they're not properly tensioned, may hold water and cause a tent collapse. It's important to get them tight, not just around the bar. Yeah, the tighter it is, the less the tent can flap. If it can flap, it can get loose and blow off the frame, and now you have a problem. Ratchets or spindles used for tightening fabric should have the correct tension. Again, the tent can hold water and stretch the fabric, causing you may have to go a return trip to the site. Another thing that we've noticed over the years is if you use a drill, an impact drill or whatever, to tighten a tensioning spindle, you could over torque it and break them. Whatever your company's policy is, make sure they understand why. If they over tighten it, now you got to replace it. You might not have one on the truck, just causes more time on the job site. Proper tensioning of pole tents gives them the stability as well as keeping them from holding water. If not tensioned properly, the poles can lift off the ground, causing the tent to fail. And again, kind of going to that same point, if you have a square tent, you have the proper staking distance. We've all seen and maybe even had to short guy a pole tent or long guy a pole tent because of that water line or electrical cable. And if you've got it what we call long guy, then the pole doesn't have enough tensioning down and it can lift up. That's an important thing to tension the tent properly. Folding fabric, another thing that is often overlooked. We all fold them differently. So whatever style you use, make sure you give them the why. Some of the whys might be that just train consistently so that there's less wear and tear on the fabric. Consistency rolled up tops allows installer to position the top correctly for a quicker and easier installation. When I did pole tents, we flipped in what we call the grommet line a little bit and the lace line down a lot more, so we knew exactly where to lay that top when we were installing a 40 by 100 pole tent or whatever. You get somebody new and they fold it half and half. Now you've got to drag it. Again, more wear and tear. So making sure they know why, some of those reasons about prolonging the fabric, more time it takes, will certainly make their job easier and add to the bottom line, and also give them a little bit of buy-in on taking care of that fabric. Loading and unloading on the site. Properly loading and unloading the truck on site is an often overlooked process. Attention to loading and unloading can save time on site as well as at your warehouse. It can help you get help from getting overweight fines, can keep things from falling out of an open truck, allows for a quick inventory check. So, you tell a new guy to go put the stuff on the truck and he puts everything on the back end of the truck because you're doing something else. Now you might pull up the scale and you've got an overweight ticket. If it's too close to the rear end of the tent, it could fall off, or truck, it could fall off the back of the truck. We don't want anything hitting a windshield of the vehicle behind us. If somebody calls you on the job site and the truck is neatly loaded there before it goes back to the shop, hey, how many of these did you have? Or I need you to find this. You can find that on the truck on the job site. Also, the warehouse crew absolutely love it when you bring back an organized truck. You get kudos for those guys. They'll make sure your trucks are loaded properly in the future. Just a few key takeaways from this. And there are, before I go into that, there are a lot of key points. I think the whole message of this is to give them the why, to make them a better employee. There's so many. When I was younger and got started, I think the supervisors felt like I was trying to get their job, so they didn't want to tell me anything. You make a better employee. We all need more supervisors, more lead men. So take the time to train consistently in your organization. That's another problem that we have. You might go out with one crew and they're not doing it the same way as the other crew, and now you got a guy saying, well, John doesn't do it that way. Well, that doesn't really help your organization grow or help that employee grow. Key takeaways: a well-trained team member will be a better team player. Good training makes team members feel needed and want to pursue advancement in the organization. We all have different methods and procedures, but it's extremely important to offer training so that the methods and procedures are consistent throughout your organization. I already touched on that. Consider training your supervisor to lead and train, and the how and why of the procedures that you all have. That's not something that we've always done, and I think today it's key to be able to do that. Maybe it's a separate session for just your supervisors on not just to put up the tent, but how to lead and train. We'll stop sharing now. Try to end show. There we go. I don't know if we have any questions or if that's all we got, but that is the end of the presentation in regards to me talking.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Quick question. You talked a lot about, or at the end there, you tied it in nicely about consistency, which is huge. As we all know, when you're training, and an individual goes from one crew to another, it can be really tough on somebody new. Your approach is going to be different than mine. I'm sure they're both right, but they're different. What do you guys do, or what have you done in the past about training? Bringing in new guys for the spring. Have you had any formal training sessions there at Chattanooga? Is it mostly by fire, where a guy goes out and learns the first couple busy weeks of the year? Or do you bring guys in early and do some type of training?
We in the past, but not consistently. So, Steve, to answer your question, the overwhelming answer is put them on the job site and train them there. We have in the years past brought them in and taught them how to tie knots and ropes, and showed them what a frame tent was, and those type of things. Unfortunately, I don't know about everyone else, it's like, okay, we're not into the cash flow this time. Do we have the money to bring the guys in for 2 weeks to pay them 8 hours a day or 4 hours a day to train them? So we probably have skipped that. I do think, looking back, that is something that we should do in the future.
Mike, I had a question. We really emphasize the why here, but we also do a kind of a 3-step deal, and we show them how to do it and explain it to them, have them do it in front of us and explain it back to us, and then just have them flat out do it. We've taken a few leadership classes here, and we've noticed that you kind of need to, I noticed with my new guys, you kind of need to explain it to them on a elementary 8th grade level for them to kind of understand it. But what do you do with the guy who doesn't get the why? He never gets the why. But you're so short of a body, you got to have that body.
Yep. What do you do with that? You just have to follow up behind them. And we've experienced the same problems, Greg. And I wish I had a solid answer for you. What happens, as I was an installer for 10 years, and a lot of people can probably recognize this. When you get to the job site, you would love nothing more than to say, the tent goes here, let's go do our thing. But unfortunately, that's not it, and you do have to supervise. So what do? You probably just have to hold that guy's hand until you can get somebody that can learn. There are many, in exploring this and other management classes I've taken, we all learn differently. Adults learn differently from children. There's visual learners, there's kinetic learners, and maybe that person doesn't fit at all, and you're just going to tell him to carry the poles and go sit at the truck until he needs something else to carry. I don't know, but we have those. I wish I could say we didn't. But I think that's what I would have to do, is babysit them if I were on the job site, because I need them. Exactly right. What you're saying. I don't know if maybe somebody else has a solid answer.
All right. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Anybody else?
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
I'll let you go ahead.
Got a few to jump in here. Nick from Aztec Tents. I'm curious, when you have new hires, do you send them home with homework for, like a new manual or something like that they can get a glimpse at how to lace a tent, or maybe some of your procedures that they can study before showing up for day one, so that you don't necessarily start at the very, very basics on that first day, that maybe they'd recognize a video that they saw on how to lace a tent when they get to that stage of the install?
We don't do enough of that, Nick. We do have a book. We also, again, I may not be leading by example in this statement, but we have a lot of these processes. Like, we have a book that a new trainee can take along and get his supervisor to say, okay, he's qualified to put up a 10 by 10 tent. He's qualified to put up a 20 by 20 or an expandable. And that book he can keep. But what happens is, again, I go back to, I'm not making excuses. I'm just telling the truth. So it's making me feel like we got to do this. You get busy and that kind of goes out the window. And generally it's, hey, we need you tomorrow, and come in tomorrow, and you're back on the job training. So inevitably, I think what you're asking would be a great thing to do. We have the materials. I just don't think we're taking the time to do that. And that's probably a process we personally need to change.
Sure. Okay. Just curious. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, Nick, one thing that, and I bet there are probably resources from any vendor, whatever vendor you buy from, that might have a YouTube video that will allow you to hey, new employee, I'm buying an Aztec product. here's a video on how to lace. Here's how a video to put up a jumbo track or whatever. There's probably those resources available. I have spoken to several companies across the country that actually have their own YouTube channel, and they put some of those things on there. That's another great way to do that. Is if you do your own video, or you get a video from your vendor, you put it on your YouTube channel and say, hey, go to our YouTube channel and watch these, and hopefully that would help you. That's a great training tool too.
Yeah. I mean, part of my job also is to go out and do trainings for new customers, sometimes end users. And that's one of the first places I would start. Is we've got pretty good documentation on our website for some of our core products, as well as plenty of others. But yeah, just shoot off some videos, some diagrams, install procedures.
That's good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And we have a couple other questions that have come in through the chat here. So how do you combat the younger crew members that come in and don't understand that you don't put in one season and become a foreman / crew leader?
All right, I'm gonna get down to that. I want to make sure I'm reading that right. Okay, I'm having a hard time rolling my cursor. Well, first off, I wouldn't say that necessarily has to be the truth. I think the manager, the leadership in the company has to look at that. I have seen guys that have come in and can be a tent installation crew leader. They may need to develop leadership skills, but I have seen people come in, although rare, that can come in after one season, and the next season you're out having them put up a 40-100 pole tent, a 60-100 pole tent, a 40-100 frame tent. They may not go out and do a 50-meter structure. So I think there should be some testing on your part, on your company's part, that allows you to really test their knowledge. Give them a test in regards to how are you going to handle this. You get there and the customer says, well, Mike said it was going to be this way. Run them through those drills. So you're generally, it's going to probably be 2 seasons, but there have been some who can do that. If you have one that says, I'm that guy, then you have to say, prove it, and you give them through a couple of tests. That's my only suggestion.
All right, and then we have another question here. Do you guys ever internally revisit or revise your training approach after seeing what is working or not working?
Yes, we do. And right now we're probably in one of those very need to do change the processes. I've been in the business for 43 years, and how I learned and how I was taught was totally different from how I might teach somebody who's 18 to 20 right now. We all learn different, and that's another thing. Each person learns differently. Unfortunately, and that's what I'm trying to help raise awareness to, we all hire, not all, but a lot of us hire at the last minute, and all we have is throw them to the fire. And not that they can't learn, but you're out there and you've got a timeline, and your supervisor may not take the time to give them the whys. They're definitely going to tell them how, but they're not going to take the time to do them why. So maybe the pre-training is where you give them the why, and they get the how out there on the hands-on on the job site. Hope that answers the question, Marcus.
All right, and does anyone else have any other questions, or if they want to raise their hand with any tips or tricks that they have or comments, we'll take those now.
Please.
I could just raise my own hand and get in there, Mike. Good job. So I had always over the years, I had a big problem training the staff to call out broken items, damaged items, whether it was on the takedown, the install, something that's really dirty. I don't know if you had any tips for that. What we wound up doing and worked fairly well was we set up an email address called Fix Me, at PTG. And we said, if you see something broken, take a picture of it. You don't even have to write a description if it's obvious, take a picture. If it was a serialized numbered item, take a shot of the serial number, send it in, and somebody monitored that email and try to get to those repairs and get to those things. But I found that was one of the biggest problems, and we didn't master it, but it was one of the biggest problems that we had was trying to get call out on damaged, dirty, broken before it went back to another job.
We don't have anything like that. I do like your idea. Unfortunately, we end up with it seeing broken. But kind of to touch on that, years ago, a lot of the guys didn't have smartphones, and now most of them do. Not all of them, but at least one member on the crew does. We require the supervisors when they take down a tent to give us a condition report, and that's to they fill out a sheet of paper and write down the top number and its condition, whether it needs to be cleaned, etc. Well, what I'm seeing now, I used to get out of the truck, take it, go around all the tents and fill that out. What they're doing now is they're taking pictures with their smartphone,
Right?
So they don't forget. So if they're using their smartphone for that, then take a picture of your broken and send it to this email address. I like that idea. Good idea.
Okay, great. Thanks.